bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. As Western companies pull out of Russia, are Chinese firms moving in? The latest news on how the war in Ukraine is changing the world in ways you never thought of. Also, the environmentalists who are letting down the tyres on 4x4 vehicles. Is it insulate Britain all over again? What to do about it? And just how bad for your health is working night shifts? Dr. Veena Babu will explain. Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, an American commentator who has made her life in Britain, Sarah Elliott. But first, the headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock in the GB newsroom. President Zelensky says children are trapped under rubble following a Russian airstrike on a hospital in Mariupol. Mariupol City Council says the Russian bombing has completely destroyed the city's children's hospital. Earlier, Ukraine's foreign minister accused Russia of holding 400,000 residents hostage by shelling the port city, despite efforts to establish a safe evacuation corridor. It's after Russia said its troops would stop firing there, along with 4 other Ukrainian cities, to let civilians evacuate. Boris Johnson says the number of Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK will rise very sharply to hundreds of thousands in the coming weeks. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK says his officials will help to deal with refugees if the visa rules are lifted. But the Prime Minister says we must have checks to avoid unnecessary security risks. Meanwhile, Downing Street has announced that a new visa processing centre in Lille in France will begin accepting appointments from tomorrow. The Prime Minister says the UK is out in front giving humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians.
The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are directly descended, Mr. Speaker, from refugees. And we understand how much refugees have to give to this country, and we understand how much this country has to gain from welcoming refugees. And we will be generous, and we are being generous, Mr. Speaker.
The Labour leader says the Prime Minister cannot blame the UK's rising energy bills on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as pressures existed before the conflict. It says UK drivers are hit by the second largest daily hike in diesel prices for more than 20 years, with the average cost of a litre at a record £1.65. Experts have warned sanctions on Russian oil will further increase prices at the pump. The UK has promised to phase out Russian oil by the end of the year. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told MPs the UK needs to invest more in North Sea oil.
I want to make clear to the House that we fully intend and we must end our dependency on all Russian hydrocarbons. In the meantime, we need more investment in North Sea oil and gas production as we make the move to cheaper and cleaner power.
The loss of power at the Chernobyl power plant in Ukraine will not have any critical impact on safety. That's according to the United Nations nuclear watchdog. The statement comes after Ukraine's foreign minister called for an urgent ceasefire to allow power to be restored over fears that it risked releasing radiation into the air. Well, Russia seized control of Chernobyl last month. A 28-year-old man has died on Ben Nevis in the Highlands. Police in Scotland say it's the sixth fatality in Scotland's mountains over the last 2 weeks. Rescuers worked to reach 17 people stranded on the UK's highest mountain. Well, a 7-year-old boy has made history today by becoming the youngest person ever to present a petition to the Scottish Parliament. Callum Istad is making the case for every primary school pupil to be given a reusable water bottle. He told First Minister Nicola Sturgeon it would help reduce plastic waste. Well, the ancient wreck of the Endurance has been found on the bottom of the sea in the Antarctica. Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship was discovered over 3,000 metres down. It's the first glimpse of the famous vessel since it was crushed by ice and sank on its fateful trip in 1915. Well, that's all from me for now. Let's get straight back to Colin.
Let's try and get through the next hour or two as seamlessly, as effortlessly and cleanly as possible. We've got some serious technical problems, so I'll apologise in advance. We'll try and get them fixed. Alongside in the studio, if you can see her, I do hope you can, is Sarah Elliott, who's my guest today, regular commentator, born in America but now has made her home in the UK, but follows politics in both countries very closely. Sarah, I want to particularly talk to you today about what I think is a really important move by the Americans. You can talk about it being the case of maybe them blinking first if you were being negative and defeatist about it, but they've rejected this Polish offer of using Ramstein Air Base, an American air base in Germany, to basically fly in MiG jets that then would be effectively loaned to the Ukrainian Air Force. And it does appear that the American government's decided that is an antagonistic step too far.
Yes, and I have to say, I agree with this step by President Biden. It is a moment for all of us to pause and really think about what our involvement should be in the Ukrainian crisis. I also think, you know, it's a way, there are now limitations to what the Americans will do and to what NATO will do. It's kind of, we haven't had quite a clear demarcation as to how far NATO will go to help Ukraine. And this has now been a firm demarcation along with the no-fly zone refusal. So I think it's all about humanitarian aid to Ukraine. It's all about supporting and defending our NATO allies, but it seems that NATO does not want to get involved. The U.S. is taking a slight step back or maybe a cautionary step in the Ukrainian war. But of course, all of our hearts and support is with Zelensky and his country.
And it was amazingly moving around about, almost 24 hours ago. It was 5 o'clock, wasn't it, yesterday? An extraordinary historic address to the Palace of Westminster, the House of Commons, but also there were peers who'd gathered in the public galleries to watch what he had to say. They're really, really moving. But behind all that, this is having an impact on the way we look at Russia in particular. I say that because I'm just looking on my news feed that comes from our friends at the Press Association. They're reporting that the Cardiff Philharmonic Orchestra, this has literally just happened, or it's just been reported in the last 10 minutes or so. The Cardiff Philharmonic has removed the Russian composer Tchaikovsky from its programme of upcoming concerts because of the current conflict in Ukraine, saying it would be, quote, inappropriate at this time. Now, I note that when Milan University dumped Fyodor Dostoevsky's novels from their literature courses, they were shamed into reversing that decision. I wonder if that will happen to Cardiff. And I say that because it's really important, isn't it, to make a distinction between a vile leadership in the Kremlin, Putin and his cronies, and the people of Russia, who didn't elect him.
Right. I was just going to say that. This is not a democratically elected president. This is a madman who's on his own and making these decisions. We don't know how. And Russian culture is beautiful. It's been such a gift to the world in so many wondrous ways. And we can't confuse the two. And this seems like pure ignorance to me. And you wouldn't expect this from a symphony. The works of art should be shared. And actually, I think more so, much better than what is being taught in schools and music classes today.
We were talking in the commercial break, and by the way, we may need to talk for quite a bit longer because those technical problems that used to be a problem have been returned, at least for a little while. I was talking to Peter Hitchens this morning for an hour. It'll be available in podcast form soon. Really interesting. Peter Hitchens, veteran commentator, actually a veteran foreign correspondent to some degree. And we were talking, as we were just talking during the commercial break, about the way wars are reported now, and the journalism of emoting as opposed to the journalism of analysis. And it seems to some, it certainly appears to Peter Hitchens, and I sort of see what he's saying, that when we see coverage of conflicts now, if you compare it to, say, 40 years ago, it's the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War this year, the BBC were criticised at the time for being, as many people saw it, excessively journalistically fastidious. Why? Because they insisted on talking about British forces and Argentinian forces. And people were saying, well, why are they talking about British forces? This is the BBC talking about British soldiers. But they felt they had to have this sort of third-party journalistic detachment. That was then. Now, it's a lot more about how people are feeling, feelings. I mean, look, there's a place for the journalism of attachment and explaining what's happening on the ground. But.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think it's our era in which we live in. Everything is about feelings, and people are always victims of having their feelings hurt all the time. And I'm kind of tired of hearing about victimhood, to be honest. But obviously, in a war, there are legitimate victims, and you want to understand how it's impacting them. But also, you need to know the geopolitical realities. You need to see the bigger picture. You can't be caught up in grandma with a bandage on her head. And quite frankly, there have been some images that the mainstream media have used, other than GBNews, that are from other Ukrainian conflicts that they're putting in front of you to make you think it's current news. And this only deteriorates people's trust in the media itself. And then they start thinking there's ulterior motives behind the media. And so when you see something like the BBC just broadcast emotional pictures and things like that, you start to think, well, what do they want us to feel? What are they trying to promote? Or do they think we should be more involved? Should we be actually in direct conflict and war with Russia right now? Is that what they're pushing? So especially after the COVID pandemic, there's so much distrust with the media and just general institutions in our democracy that it just questions everything. One questions everything. No one knows who to trust.
Thanks for extemporising in the way you did. We're about to start going through some of your holiday snaps, maybe see if you could do some juggling. But because we are going to take a commercial break, we'll try and put some coins in the meter and see where that leads us. Time for that break right now.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a wet and windy start to the day for much of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and there'll continue to be spells of rain in the west through the rest of the day. But the winds are coming down and the rain will also ease overnight. Weather fronts are pushing in ever so slowly from the west. The squeeze in the isobars ahead of these weather fronts has brought some gales to Western Scotland, Northern Ireland earlier in the day. But through the evening and overnight, the winds ease. The rain also tends to peter out, but it will still be raining with some hill snow for the mountains of Scotland there, and the rain extending into parts of Wales and the southwest through the night. Clear spells ahead of that for central and eastern England, as well as the northwest. And it's in the northwest behind the front where a touch of frost is possible, 2 to 4 Celsius generally, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but a milder start elsewhere because of the cloud, because of those outbreaks of rain. And the rain continues for some time across much of Scotland, northern England during Thursday morning. Brighter skies for a time for Wales and southern and central England, but further showers will come along later on. And it's mild once again, 14 Celsius in the southeast, a bit colder further northwest, 9 or 10 Celsius for Belfast and Glasgow. Into Thursday evening, drier and clearer for a time for Scotland, northern England, but further cloud and outbreaks of rain or showers move up from the south. And so that by the early hours, for most, it's generally cloudy. There'll be on and off rain at times, and the breeze will be picking up. So a mild night, a frost-free night for most, with temperatures dipping to 7 to 9 Celsius generally. Then we start off Friday with that breeze, with further spells of rain pushing into southwest England, reaching Wales, central southern England during the morning. That breaks up into showers, so Friday afternoon generally is a showery picture for much of the UK. A lot of cloud in the sky. The showers ease on Saturday, but further rain on Sunday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, when the history of the Ukraine war gets written, will events in the last 24 hours emerge as a turning point? America rejected a Polish plan that would have seen the US get involved in the transfer of fighter jets to Ukrainian pilots. For Washington, it was a step too far, a sign that they are fearful of overly antagonising a nuclear-armed Russia. Let's talk to Major General Tim Cross, who's been a regular contributor to the show and reflects on some of the logistical problems that the Russian army have been facing that's been stopping them mounting an effective invasion to a great degree, but also the broader picture in Ukraine and beyond. Tim Cross, thanks so much for your time today. What's caught your eye today? Is it Mariupol down there? Is it what's happening elsewhere in the country? Is it, as I say, that apparent refusal by the Americans to go along with the Polish plan? What should we pay particular heed to?
Well, in a way, it's a mixture of all three, of course. This whole move seems to have stalled. We've said this for a while, but it's quite clear that they're not making the progress they wanted. So what's happening in the cities is clearly important. But I do think you're right in the context of the what we were talking about the other day, that this idea of the Poles giving to the Ukrainian Air Force some of their old MiGs and them being replaced by American F-16s. To be honest, I'm not surprised the Americans have said this. I think we collectively, including the media actually, need to be very clear that there is, obviously, this Ukrainian war is terrible, et cetera, but we need to be clear that there's a very strong line between this developing into a conflict between NATO and Russia. And aeroplanes are offensive weapons. This is not like giving anti-tank weapons or indeed anti-aircraft weapons to the Ukrainians. Aeroplanes are offensive weapons. And once you start giving offensive weapons, then you're crossing a line. And I can understand why the Americans are very reluctant to do that.
Tim Cross, as somebody who worked, as I say, in logistics, making sure that an army was fed and fueled and all the rest of it, could you just talk to us a little bit about the effects of very cold temperatures? I mean, stories today about some of the Russian tanks effectively acting as refrigerators in minus 20 conditions. How does fighting become difficult in temperatures that cold?
Well, yeah, you're right. It does have a big impact. I mean, one of the issues that's undoubtedly the case is that a lot of these, what we call B vehicles, the soft skin vehicles, have got relatively cheap tyres. Most of them, I have to say, from China. And the cold weather and the age of those tyres is beginning to have quite an impact. So quite a lot of these lorries are breaking down. Cold weather, of course, means that people need more calories in order to stay, relatively warm, just as we would want to have hot soup and hot food and so forth. I've only ever served really in hot climates. I've done a bit of work in cold climates, but cold climates, definitely you need more calories, you need more food. And then when you're in vehicles, whether they're armored vehicles or soft skin vehicles, people will keep their engines running even when they're static in order to keep warm, as people would do in a traffic jam over here, or if they were stuck in the hills in a snowfall or whatever. So that means you're burning up fuel on a continuous basis. So you've got the issue of burning through your combat supplies, your fuel and your food. You've also got the issue of burning through things like tires and other material as well. So and of course movement is difficult too. I mean, it depends what's happening over there in terms of whether the snow is building up. I don't think it is. Actually, I think probably what's going to happen more here is that the warmer weather will come in if they don't get a move on, and they're going to find themselves in slush and mud and so forth. Some of those famous pictures we saw, in our war films from World War II, that will begin to hit.
Tim Cross, I know you've hung on to talk to us, so we appreciate your patience and your expertise. Thanks ever so much, Tim Cross there. Let's just throw up, if we can, technology permitting, the live signal we've got from Washington, I believe. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, will be speaking there imminently live, and we'll bring part of what she says at least to you. Sarah Elliott's alongside me, American living in the UK. Reflect, Sarah, if you can, on what Tim Cross was just saying there about what he clearly perceived to be an important moment, this idea that the Americans would not go along with this idea of nodding, approving the idea of MiG jets going to Ukraine with the Americans acting as a kind of intermediary.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how he differentiated between different military equipment. So anti-aircraft or anti-missile is kind of defensive and fine, but when it turns to a jet, that's very offensive, that's very aggressive, and so it signals to Russia an aggressive, wanting to engage kind of signal. And I think, again, I think the president has showed a lot of cautiousness and prudency, because there are ramifications of engaging with a nuclear Russia, which, by the way, if you think back to 1939, they didn't have nuclear weapons at that time, but now we do, and all sorts of different types of bioweapons and just really awful things that can destroy and ruin the world. So we don't want to have World War III and the end of the world. So we need that cautiousness, and I think that's good, and I think that keeps us an even keel. What I find very fascinating is we're almost at 2 weeks now into this conflict, and Russia hasn't taken over Kiev yet. I mean, it's really amazing, and we thought that he would march in, stomp, have Zelensky's head on a spike by now, and the weather's getting warmer. The tanks are going to get stuck in the mud if they can even move. I mean, what Tim Cross said about the tires, about using the fuel to keep them warm in negative 20-degree temperatures, it's really quite something, and it's quite embarrassing to Putin.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope it's sufficiently embarrassing that it allows others to loosen his grip on power. Wouldn't that be a relatively nice outcome amid the horror, the bloodletting and the bloodshed for now? Let's just show you again that picture for the first time. There it is. We're in Washington. We're going to be listening to Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, addressing the cameras there. Liz Truss, along with the Prime Minister yesterday, they both looked absolutely exhausted as they waited for Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, to address the House of Commons. They're working furiously, as you'd expect, right now. Let's see what they've got to say. Let's see what Liz Truss has to say as soon as she appears at that lectern. We'll take you there. Before that happens, let's tell you about these companies and what's going on with them. Google, McDonald's, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Netflix, Mercedes, Ford, Twitter, Adidas, dozens of firms. They've joined the Western cancelling of Russia, and yesterday the US announced a Russian energy import ban. Will something worse fill the vacuum that those companies leave behind. Financial services, they're a big part of the gap that's being left, with Visa, Swift, MasterCard and Apple Pay all pulling out. In response, Russian banks have quickly turned, well, where do you think they've turned? To Chinese payment systems. Joining me now, Benedict Rogers, the Chief Executive of Hong Kong Watch and a seasoned China watcher. Benedict, thanks for your time. Do you think in all this there is a gap that the Chinese commercially will exploit in Russia?
I think undoubtedly. Xi Jinping has made clear that the friendship between the Chinese regime and Putin's regime is, I think the phrase was knows no limits. And of course, businesses in China are not entirely independent of the Chinese state. So I think we can certainly expect China to step in. And I think actually we should be looking at secondary sanctions to sanction not just Russia, but China's complicity with Russia.
Is there a danger, you think, Benedict, we overdo this sort of new axis of evil thing, this pact, such as it is, between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin? Or for you, is it real?
I think it is real. I think, we have seen China sort of shifting a little bit back and forth, really. I mean, we saw Xi Jinping and Putin at the Winter Olympics, clearly best friends. Since the war and with the invasion not going according to plan for Putin, we've seen China perhaps trying to offer a more constructive role. But at its heart, this is a battle between freedom and autocracy, and China and Russia are the two leading autocracies in the world.
I just wonder, Benedict, we're looking at pictures, and apologies if you're listening on the radio, it's just pictures of Putin and Xi Jinping, and they say set a thief to catch a thief. I just wonder whether you can set a demagogue to persuade a demagogue to change course. I mean, I know Xi Jinping has shown signs of growing demagoguery, the school of Xi Jinping thought and all the rest of it, but compared to how Putin's been behaving recently, he's a rational actor, and therefore an important voice, you would hope, who might be able to talk him down.
I think that is possible. Putin now has, what other friends in the world does he have except Xi Jinping? So if Xi Jinping chose to play a more constructive role and persuade Putin to find an exit route, then he's probably the one person who has a chance of success with that.
Interestingly, and again, apologies to people listening on radio, we're looking at pictures of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I'm not sure when they were taken, but they certainly predate the time when Vladimir Putin only met people with a 20-foot wide air gap when it came to sitting around a table. And I say that only half mockingly, Benedict Rogers, because when we see those pictures of Putin at the end of the table, we're told that it may be COVID-related, which seems balmy. And indicative, perhaps, of somebody who is struggling actually to calibrate logically risk. If they can't calibrate risk about COVID, how can they calibrate risk about nuclear deterrence? That's the worry.
That is indeed the worry. And I'm no expert on Putin and Russia, but from everything that we've all read in recent weeks, it does appear that he is extremely isolated, that he doesn't have people around him who can give him good advice. Perhaps the many months of isolation because of COVID has affected his judgment. And as you say, if he needs a really long table because of COVID, then how is he going to calibrate the risks of far more dangerous things?
Benedict Rogers, good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. We're still looking at those pictures from Washington, by the way. Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, about to speak in America. Sarah Elliott's reflecting on that conversation with Benedict Rogers. We don't know, do we, whether Putin and Xi Jinping trust each other. We assume they're circling each other like a couple of would-be adversaries who have to make a bit of a deal right now.
Yes, and they're neighbors, and they're, as you said, the largest dictatorships or autocracies in the world, and they have the same enemies. So that makes them convenient friends. And also what makes a very convenient friend to Putin is a country that has over 1 billion people who need energy. And so when the rest of the world cuts them off, Who can they turn to, of which they share a border with as well? So I think it's friends of convenience. I kind of tend to think that Putin waited until the Winter Olympics were finished to do his invasion as a nod to Xi. And I think Xi is watching and seeing how the West is reacting to Ukraine because he has his eye on Taiwan. But the one thing when we talk about nuclear war and deterrence, I think the one thing those both men fear so much is their own mortality, and that they haven't quite established the legacies yet that they want to be remembered for. So maybe just their own selfish desire to keep living will keep us out of nuclear war.
Wow. By the way, just on those pictures of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, I'm told they were a month ago. So maybe there are different rules for important visitors from China compared to important visitors, say, from France. Yeah. Macron was put a long way off, wasn't he? Well, now, Amazon yesterday cracked down on the sale of merchandise with the Russian military Z, or as Sarah would say, Z, symbol. Before removing the items, the e-retailer was widely criticised for selling clothing with that insignia. The listings were labelled with titles such as Russian Z symbol, military armed forces, tanks, armour, T-shirt, snappy title. Joining with the head of media at the Institute of Economic Affairs think tank, that is Emily Carver. Emily, thanks so much for your time. I always feel a little bit sorry for big e-retailers when they get, in quotes, caught out like this. They're shifting a lot of product and they sometimes are a little bit behind the curve. Is there a kind of hysteria about this symbol, do you think, or is it legitimate?
Well, I think we all can agree that it's unfortunate that Amazon, such a massive retailer, was hosting this particular seller on their platform. It's true what people were saying, that they were essentially making money off selling T-shirts with this Z symbol on them. And we know now that that symbol is a symbol of support for Russia's assault on Ukraine. So it's completely understandable that people would wish to put pressure on Amazon to remove them. It's certainly not a good look for the tech giant. But as you alluded to, it's worth noting that Amazon, of course, is a marketplace. So therefore, there shouldn't necessarily be a reason for these sort of generalized attacks on the company, the calls to boycott and so on that have been trending on Twitter. I would agree, though, that perhaps Amazon should have been a little more scrupulous. But it's not them themselves that make the T-shirts. It seems to me that they've noticed these items are being sold on their platform. They've listened to people who are rightly bereaved by that, and they've made the decision to remove them, most likely out of fears for their brand reputation, but also probably for a feeling of moral obligation to do so. So that really should just be the end of the story.
Yeah, and maybe it will be. I mean, on the moral obligation point, I mean, it takes a while for a moral obligation to clarify, doesn't it? And this is a sort of international clarification. So, for instance, the Czech police have made it illegal for people to display the Z letter. They say it's just as illegal as brandishing the swastika.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible for retailers, every business in the world, to immediately get to grips with these kind of, with the way that culture changes, with the way our expectations change, with the way symbols change in their meanings, and to understand immediately what products they should be looking for and scanning through. I mean, take the example of Amazon. They sell tens of millions of items. They change daily. It can't realistically be expected to screen every product. It's probably more difficult than monitoring Facebook for harmful or illegal content, as they call it. So when attention is drawn to a specific item like this, like these T-shirts, Amazon can then remove them. But in terms of the sort of social media hysteria, we see this so much. We see the immediate calls to boycott companies. And I think it's got quite problematic in the current situation with Russia's assault on Ukraine. I've seen elements of Russophobia. We've seen, the likes of Anna Netrebko being ousted essentially from the Met Opera in New York. We've seen other classical music institutions try to dismiss Russian music for one reason or another. It seems that businesses feel such pressure to jump on bandwagons that they make these very ill-advised decisions, in my view, and they often they can potentially be counterproductive because Russians may be watching this, ordinary Russians, and thinking that the West is indeed out to get us, as Putin might tell them.
Emily Carver, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on the letter Z. It's not even in the Cyrillic alphabet, is it? It's from the Latin,
right.
our alphabet, our Latin alphabet. But it's been used as a symbol on Russian armoured vehicles as a form of identification. It was worn by a Russian gymnast who'd had his Russian flag removed by the authorities and said you can't display it, so he put a Z on it instead. The speed with which this stuff's happening is extraordinary.
Well, he was standing next to a Ukrainian, too, on the medal stand. But you also have to wonder how much agency he has as an individual. So we can't hold it against the gymnast in this climate. But also, I find it really funny because it's Z for Zelensky. Like, are they, is that a sign, like, we're out to get you, it's all about focusing on Zelensky. But, I think most people will choose not to wear a Z because of this and just let the marketplace and social pressure ease it off these platforms.
I'm conscious we may at any point go and listen to what Liz Truss has got to say in America. Just help me, Sarah. I forget who it was now that was sitting in your chair late last week. But I was putting the point about where the line is for free expression. I'd be uncomfortable with somebody, who'd come in sitting where you are now with a Z on them. I would be beyond the pale. But in Australia last week, there were demonstrations, pro-Russian demonstrations in a big Australian city, pro-Putin demonstrations. Is that okay?
You know what? If you have the right to protest, the right to speak, yes. I say, go, you have that right. You have that individual right, and I will defend your right to say something that I find offensive. That's
really clear. Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's bring you the news headlines with Tamsin.
It's 4:34. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. President Zelensky says children are trapped under rubble after a Russian airstrike on a hospital in Ukraine. Mariupol City Council says the bombing has completely destroyed the city's children's hospital. Earlier, Ukraine's foreign minister accused Moscow of holding 400,000 residents hostage by shelling the port city, despite efforts to establish a safe evacuation corridor for civilians. It's after Russia said its troops would stop firing there, along with 4 other Ukrainian cities, to let civilians evacuate. Boris Johnson says the number of Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK will rise very sharply to hundreds of thousands in the coming weeks. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK says his officials will help to deal with refugees if the visa rules are lifted. But the Prime Minister says checks are necessary to avoid security risks. Meanwhile, Downing Street announced a new visa processing centre in Lille in France, which will begin accepting appointments from tomorrow. The loss of power at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine will not have any critical impact on safety. That's according to the United Nations nuclear watchdog. The statement comes after Ukraine's foreign minister called for an urgent ceasefire to allow power to be restored over fears that it risked releasing radiation into the air. Russia seized control of Chernobyl last month. To other news now, a 28-year-old man has died on Ben Nevis in the Highlands. Police Scotland say it's the 6th fatality in Scotland's mountains over the last 2 weeks. Rescuers work to reach 17 people stranded on the UK's highest mountain. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's back to Brazier in just a moment.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, a new environmentalist group, campaigning group, is bragging today that it's deflated the tyres of hundreds of SUVs in parts of the UK. The group, it styles itself the Tyre Extinguishers, claims that it took the action because the vehicles are a, quote, climate disaster. It also said that air pollution is racist, I think on the grounds that people who tend to live near busy roads are disproportionately non-white. I'm guessing that's what the reason is. I don't know for sure. The group says it aims to make SUVs impossible to own in urban areas. 3/4 of SUVs were bought by people living in towns and cities, according to research in 2019. A quarter bought by those living in rural areas where they are often an essential way of getting around difficult terrain. So today we debate, are SUVs a climate menace or a rural lifeline? Joining me to debate this topic is Howard Cox, founder of the Fair Fuel UK campaign. It works to lower fuel taxation. And Donica McCarthy, eco-columnist at The Independent. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Howard, could I just start with you on a... We'll come back to this in a second, but I understand you've just had a meeting with the Transport Minister. Anything you can share with us?
I'd like to share something with you at the moment. We were talking about the 2030 diesel petrol ban, and we've decided to work much closer together for communication to most of the 37 million drivers in this country. So it was a good meeting, constructive. We didn't achieve much, but we're moving forward to getting some sort of consensus in terms of actually communicating with the public.
OK, well, that's another story. I was hoping we could deliver some kind of scoop, maybe another occasion. Donica, just on this point about... not slashing tyres, letting tyres down to incapacitate SUVs. Is it moral? Might it be effective?
An interesting way of the public domain. We have to remember transport is the single largest source of carbon emissions in the United Kingdom. And over the last 15 years of regulations to make cars more efficient, what has happened is that we've started buying bigger and bigger cars. So much so that now SUVs, if they were a nation, would be the 7th largest emitter of carbon in the world. It's the 700 megatons of carbon emissions from them. The embedded carbon in these large tractors is staggering. The largest SUV, the carbon emissions would be around 35 tons. It's equivalent of 47 years of a household's electricity emissions. In a situation where the planet's on fire, with the dire warnings from the UN last week, it is totally immoral to be buying such vehicles for basically lifestyle issues in central cities.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that's always true. I mean, there are two questions, immediate questions, Howard Cox. One is that increasingly a lot of SUVs are hybrid, some are electric, and in parts of the world, outside of towns and cities, they're an essential part of getting around, towing equipment, towing trailers, horse boxes, all the rest of it. Howard Cox, that's for you. Are you still with us?
Sorry, yes, I am. So I do apologise. I thought you were still talking to Mr. McCarthy. I'm afraid his statistics, typically, they come from the Hans Christian Andersen Book of Science. He uses figures that just throws them out there for emotion, and they're not fact at all whatsoever. It's a shame we're seeing this. We understand they're actually letting down tyres, would you believe, of electric SUVs. Can you believe that? This is what's happening at the moment in time. This is a group of people similar to, I don't know what, the Extinction Rebellion, all of the sort of people that Mr. McCarthy supports. He has no clue about what matters to people, and everyone has a right to drive what they want to drive. It's as simple as that. This is a criminal act on people, and they should go to prison for it.
Well, that seems a little bit steep for laying down some tyres, I would have thought. But Donica McCarthy, do answer that point about, I mean, letting down the tyres of electric SUVs. Where's the logic in that?
Yeah, well, if you actually picked up my point, I said that the embedded carbon, a lot of people don't understand the difference between carbon emissions and embedded carbon. To make a large SUV like the tractors on the screen right now can take around 35 tons of carbon to create it for the tyres, the metal, the windows, etc. And that's the equivalent of 47 years of electricity emissions for the household in the UK. They are basically a carbon bomb before they even drive a kilometre. And
what about when they're used in the countryside, Donica?
Great. Absolutely no problem. If they're designed, 4x4s were Land Rovers. They were Land Rovers, a great British product created for terrains where cars could not go. And what happened was the marketing guys got hold of it and sold it as a lifestyle to posh people in the inner cities. And what has happened is that they have taken over the car industry rather than what they should be used for land terrain in the countryside and foreign countries where there are no roads.
Howard Cox, you've got that look on your face which is slightly disdainful. Go on.
Thank you, Colin. I just despair that Mr. McCarthy's approach. He's just totally anti-car. He's anti-everything to do with diesel, petrol, whatsoever. He's got no constructive things to say. This is a man that accuses me of genocide, killing children, killing old age pensioners. He's libelous towards me. The simple thing here is that for some reason or another, he just hates the fact that people have a choice. If they will choose to drive a vehicle, a chieftain tank, it's their choice. He shouldn't be interfering with it and encouraging people to do this in a criminal way.
Well, it's personal ad hominem attack. However, let's concentrate on
You're
facts.
very good at that. You're very good at that, Mr. McCarthy.
Let's deal with facts. We've actually looking at a situation where over the last 10 years, and what Howard Cox is advocating is that we remain addicted to fossil fuels. That's what has got us into the mess with Putin. It's got us into the mess with climate. Howard Cox's agenda is keeping Britain addicted to fossil fuels, which is disastrous for our economy, disastrous for our kids.
Gentlemen, can I just talk us down from the ceiling a little bit on this one and go right back and focus on my original question and the story today, which is activists who are letting down the tyres of SUVs. Now, just on we can talk about the morality of protesting, and there was much discussion on this news channel and elsewhere about Insulate Britain's tactics and to what extent they crossed a line. But it is prima facie a breach of the Road Traffic Act to disable somebody's car. So, Donica, I'm guessing if I say to you, is it okay to break the law in pursuit of an objective like this, you will say?
Well, I will say that historically, when we're actually facing crises such as we are on climate, people have peacefully broken the law in British tradition of protest, and it's a legal act, and the police can take action on it. However, what they are doing is positive in raising a hugely important issue in terms of the impact of climate of these cars. And so therefore, I would say it's a positive thing that they're doing for us. And remember what the United Nations General Secretary said, is that we are facing the biggest crisis in humanity's history, and we've got a less than 1% chance now of avoiding 1.5 degree rise in temperature. I wish Howard Cox would read the reports from the UN, because it's based on science, and what he's advocating with a fossil-fueled economy is disastrous for Britain and the world.
Howard Cox, I mean, there will be, perhaps, I don't know if you're in one of these cities where this campaign is taking hold, in Bristol or somewhere, and you turn up tomorrow morning to do the school run or take yourself off to the GPs and find that you're going to find another way of getting there because your tyres have been let down. If it happens persistently, you may start to think, well, I'm being victimised here because of my choice of vehicle. Maybe I should trade it in and get a different one.
No, I totally disagree with you, Colin, and I'm sorry we went off topic a bit, and I apologise for that. But the fact is,
it happens all the time, Howard.
This is a criminal act. It's as simple as that. You just cited the fact that it's prima facie evidence that's against all sorts of reasons. But I mean, if I came out and found my SUV had some of the tyres let down, and I don't know if they're slashing them or putting holes in, or just putting down with the actual, letting them down so they're not damaging the tyre. The damage to the wheel, damage to the tyre, all these sorts of things, how are they going to get compensation for that? And the interference of their daily life, what they're doing, like delivering kids to the schools. The problem is, this is not the way to do this. The best way to get things across regarding the environment and the problems that Mr. McCarthy's talking about is through debate, not by interfering in people's lives.
And also, Donica, I just wonder, who are these protesters to adjudicate on this? How do they know whether the tyres they're letting down on a Land Rover in a town won't then belong to a car that's about to be driven back to the country, perhaps down an icy road where the extra grip is needed?
Well, I mean, there's actually no ice on the roads today, Colin, as you
know.
No,
I know.
They're fairly sure on that front. Let's be real. It's a stunt. It's trying to raise an issue. I think it's a small inconvenience for people, obviously annoying for them, but a very important point. We have to take action. And when people do things like that, it's normally a sign of despair that the government isn't reacting to what is needed. And the tragedy is that the government's listening to people like Howard, who's actually cost the United Kingdom £110 billion and lost taxes over the last 10 years with his fare fuel claim, which is damaging the HNS.
Donica, I must interrupt you. We've got about 30 seconds left, and I want to let Howard Cox have the last word. I just wonder whether inconvenience is the right word. I just wonder how some people will respond if they go outside and catch somebody in the act of letting down their tyres. I wonder how understanding they're likely to be, Howard Cox.
Well, obviously, on the how long is a piece of string, Colin, I think there's a lot of people who might punch the lights out of the person doing it or simply report them to the police. Either way, I'm not condoning
Howard Cox,
violence.
Veronica McCarthy, got to pull it there, but going straight to Washington. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, speaking.
Everyone here today, and it's especially good to see my colleague and friend, Foreign Secretary Truss. Liz and I have been working around the world together, almost nonstop, on the most immediate matter at hand, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, but on a multiplicity of other things, because our countries are joined in having shared interests across virtually every significant issue before the world now. We were just in Brussels last week with ministers from our fellow NATO allies, the G7, the European Union, focused particularly on continuing what has been extraordinarily close coordination and cooperation in response to Moscow's unprovoked, unjustified, and increasingly brutal war in Ukraine. We and our teams are in almost constant contact as we calibrate a united response, not just between our two nations, which have a long history of working hand in hand through the special relationship, but with allies and partners across Europe and indeed beyond. At least in my experience of doing this for nearly 30 years, I cannot remember a time where we've seen such unity in the transatlantic relationship, both in policy and in principle. We are united in strengthening our security assistance to Ukraine for its heroic defenders. We're united in increasing our assistance to the people of Ukraine, who are suffering grievously due to the growing humanitarian catastrophe inflicted upon them by Moscow's invasion. And we're united in our efforts to raise the costs on the Kremlin for waging this ongoing war of choice, which has already displaced more than 2 million Ukrainians. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Johnson announced an additional £175 million in aid to Ukraine, bringing the UK's total support during the crisis, I believe, to approximately £400 million. This includes direct assistance for the Ukrainian government to pay the salaries of Ukraine's public sector employees who are keeping critical services running where they haven't been bombed by the Russians. The UK was one of the first European countries to send defensive lethal security assistance to Ukraine. And the government has imposed severe financial sanctions on President Putin, his inner circle, Russian oligarchs, and others who enable and fuel this aggression. Just days ago, the House of Commons passed a new economic crime bill aimed at making it easier to sanction groups of corrupt individuals and harder for those trying to hide their money in the UK. Yesterday, in the latest of the many steps that we've taken together to hold the Kremlin accountable, President Biden banned all imports of Russian oil, liquefied natural gas, and coal. Prime Minister Johnson committed to ban all imports of Russian oil by the end of 2022. We're also united in calling on the Kremlin to immediately allow Ukrainian civilians to safely depart the cities and towns of Ukraine that are besieged by Russian forces. Every country has a responsibility to join us in pressing Moscow to do this. This is not the time to equivocate by calling on both sides to allow civilians in Ukraine cities to leave safely. Doing so obfuscates the basic facts around why these corridors are necessary and who is blocking them. Russia invaded Ukraine without justification. Russian forces now encircle multiple Ukrainian cities after having destroyed much of their critical infrastructure, leaving people without water, without electricity, without access to food and medicine. And Russia's relentless bombardment, including of civilians trying to flee, prevents people from safely escaping the hellish conditions that they've created. The Kremlin's proposals to create humanitarian corridors leading into Russia and Belarus are absurd. It's offensive to suggest the Ukrainian people should seek refuge from the very government that has demonstrated such disregard for their lives. The civilians who were able to escape yesterday through one of those corridors from Sumy to Poltava, another city in Ukraine, shows that this is possible, but it must be allowed to happen on a much broader scale. It's not only in Europe where the United States and the UK are working together to address threats to international peace and security. We also share a grave concern about Iran's nuclear advances. Together, we discussed our work to achieve a mutual return to compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the so-called Iran nuclear agreement. Either way, we are committed to ensuring that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon. On Northern Ireland, President Biden has been steadfast in his support for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which he views as a historic achievement that must be protected to ensure the peace, stability, and prosperity of people in Northern Ireland. The United States continues to support both sides' efforts to engage in productive dialogue to resolve differences over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Before handing it over to Liz, let me just make one final point. It's not just the British government that's stepping up to help Ukraine. We're also seeing incredible solidarity and compassion from the British people. People like Khalid Elliott in Cheltenham, who is leading a local campaign to buy second-hand ambulances and drive them, packed with supplies, to humanitarian responders at Ukraine's border. People like Yorkshire resident Magdalena Timon, who, on the second night of Russia's invasion, sent a message to a Facebook group called Polish Mums of Leeds, appealing for donations to help people in Ukraine. Within days, she'd received enough to fill 3 18-wheelers. I believe one reason we're seeing such an outpouring of support from the British people is because they've been through something similar. The harrowing Blitz during World War II inflicted colossal suffering on the country's people, killing more than 60,000 British civilians, wounding 86,000 more. It's impossible to see the images of people seeking refuge in Kyiv's metro in 2022 and not think of those who sheltered in the London Underground in 1942. The grit, the compassion, the determination that Britons exhibited 8 decades ago that inspired the world is exactly what we see in the people of Ukraine today, and it's why we need to stand with them. With that, Liz, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tony, and it's great to be here with my friend and ally, Secretary Blinken, and we've certainly seen a lot of each other around the capitals of Europe over the last week, working very closely with our allies. Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine is causing immense pain and suffering, yet he is not making the progress he planned. Since the build-up on the border, the United Kingdom and the United States have led work in the G7 and through NATO to challenge Putin's aggression. Before the invasion, the United States and the UK called out his playbook of false flags, attempts to install a puppet regime in Kiev, and fake provocations. We worked with our G7 allies to warn that he would face severe costs and a determined Ukrainian people. We have surprised Putin with our unity and the toughness of our sanctions, hitting the banks, the ships, the planes, the oligarchs, and the oil and gas revenues. And the brave Ukrainian people have surprised him with their determination and their leadership. Now is not the time to let up. Putin must fail. We know from history that aggressors only understand one thing, and that is strength. We know that if we don't do enough now, other aggressors around the world will be emboldened. And we know that if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, there would be terrible implications for European and global security. We would be sending a message that sovereign nations can simply be trampled on. So we must go further and faster in our response. We must double down on our sanctions. That includes a full SWIFT ban and the G7 ending its use of Russian oil and gas. The United States and the United Kingdom this week announced our plans to stop importing Russian oil, and the EU have announced their plans to reduce their dependency too. We want to encourage a wider group of countries to get on board with our sanctions effort. 141 countries voted against Russian aggression at UNGA. And we must continue to supply defensive weapons to Ukraine. I'm proud that the United Kingdom was the first European country to do that, and I welcome the decision of Germany and Japan and many others to send military aid. Since the end of the Cold War, we took our eye off the ball, but we are now stepping up together, and we must never let down our guard again. We're determined to keep strengthening NATO and urge all allies to increase their investment. We must accelerate NATO's modernisation and deepen our cooperation on tech and cyber. We will end strategic dependence on authoritarian regimes for our energy and for other vital resources. And we will step up our work to build economic and security alliances around the world, including with India and the Gulf nations, to further isolate Russia. We'll keep working to bring more countries into the orbit of those who believe in the sovereignty of nation and by playing by the rules. The war in Ukraine is a struggle for the future of freedom and self-determination. We must not rest until Putin fails in Ukraine and the country's sovereignty is restored. Thank you.
We'll now turn to questions, taking 2 questions per side, alternating. We'll start with Kylie Atwood of CNN.
Good afternoon or morning. Thank you for doing this. Secretary Blinken, yes or no, do you believe it's possible to get the Ukrainians MiG-29 fighter jets? If so, when and how?
Nothing for my friend. Okay.
We'll go to you next.
First, as we've said, the decision about whether to transfer any equipment to our friends in Ukraine is ultimately one that each government will decide for itself and has to make. We're in very close consultation with allies and partners about the ongoing security assistance to Ukraine, because, in fact, I think what we're seeing is that Poland's proposal shows that there are some complexities that the issue presents when it comes to providing security assistance. We have to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. You heard from the Department of Defense just yesterday about the particular proposal, the prospect of fighter jets at the disposal of the United States government, departing from a U.S. NATO base in Germany to fly into airspace contested with Russia over Ukraine raises some serious concerns for the entire NATO alliance. So we have to work through the specifics of these things going forward. And it's not simply clear to us that there's a substantive rationale for doing it in the way that was put forward yesterday. So what we're doing right now is continuing to consult very closely with Poland, with other NATO allies on this, and the logistical challenges that it presents, together with Poland, as well as with the UK and many of our other partners. As we've noted, we have provided extraordinary support to Ukraine and to those defending it from the Russian aggression, support that has been used extremely effectively by Ukrainian defenders.
Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, flanked by Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, talking about the war in Ukraine. We carry on listening.
With the supplemental legislation being put forward, we have an additional $6.5 billion in security assistance that's now on tap just from the United States for Ukraine. And that will, of course, include the very kinds of things that they need to effectively defend Ukraine against Russian aggression.
Thanks. And just to clarify, basically what you're saying is there is a creative way to get them these fighter jets, possibly, but you haven't figured out the pathway forward on that. And then my second question for both of you is, with Ukrainian deaths mounting right now, what more can the US and the UK do? Would either country be open to considering the possibility of a limited no-fly zone over humanitarian corridors to be set up in the country? Thank you.
So, first of all, in answer to your question, the United Kingdom has been, first of all, supplying defensive weaponry into Ukraine. And in fact, we have been working with other allies across the world to help get that defensive weaponry into Ukraine. So we've been supplying anti-tank weapons. Today, our Defence Secretary announced that we will now be supplying air defence systems to address the specific issue the Ukrainians face, which is air defence. So we believe that the best way of tackling this threat is to help the Ukrainians with the Starstreak air defence systems that we will be supplying. On the issue of a no-fly zone, of course it's important, and I completely support what Tony has said about protecting humanitarian corridors and calling on Russia to respect those genuine humanitarian corridors, i.e. ones that don't lead into Russia or Belarus. But the reality is that setting up a no-fly zone would lead to a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. And that is not what we are looking at. What we are looking at is making sure that the Ukrainians are able to defend their own country with the best possible selection of anti-tank weapons and anti-air defence systems.
I agree with everything that the Foreign Secretary said.
Kylie, we need to move on. Please, go ahead.
Could we have Sarah Smith at the BBC, please?
After the direct strike on a children's hospital in Mariupol, President Zelensky is asking you both and NATO to stop the killings, close the skies, he says, and that if you don't, you're an accomplice to terror. How do you explain to him that there is no possibility of a no-fly zone in these circumstances?
Well, as I've said, Sarah, the best way to help protect the skies is through anti-air weaponry, which the UK is now going to be supplying to Ukraine. That's what the Defence Secretary announced earlier today. And of course, the attack on the hospital is absolutely abhorrent, reckless and appalling. And the UK is at the forefront of supplying humanitarian aid into Ukraine. We've already pledged 220 million of humanitarian aid. Our DEC appeal has now reached 130 million, which is the largest amount it's ever achieved since 2004. So the British people are full square behind the people of Ukraine, and we're doing all we can to support.
And I would just add, as we already said, first, we both, our governments both, our peoples both have tremendous admiration for President Zelensky, for his entire team, for the Ukrainian people that they represent. But the courage they've shown, the strength, the determination, the dignity faced with this Russian onslaught is extraordinary. And it's powerfully moving, I think, to people around the world. If I were in President Zelensky's position, I'm sure I would be asking for everything possible in his mind to help the Ukrainian people. And as the Foreign Secretary and I have laid out, both of our countries and so many others have done extraordinary things to make sure that the Ukrainians have in their hands the means to effectively defend themselves against this war of choice from Russia, as well as to do everything we can with very significant resources to care for Ukrainian people to the best of our ability inside Ukraine, those who've been forced to flee outside of Ukraine to meet their humanitarian needs. And the goal is the same. It's to end this aggression, it's to save lives, and to prevent more senseless bloodshed. As part of that, we also have to see to it that this war does not expand. Our goal is to end the war, not to expand it, including potentially expand it to NATO territory. We want to make sure that it's not prolonged to the best of our ability. Otherwise, it's going to turn even deadlier, involve more people, and I think potentially even make things harder to resolve in Ukraine itself. So, as the Foreign Secretary said, we have exactly the same perspective on that. Introducing, in our case, American service members in Ukraine, on Ukrainian territory or soil, or American pilots into Ukrainian airspace, whether on a full or on a limited basis, would almost certainly lead to direct conflict between the United States, between NATO, and Russia. And that would expand the conflict. It would prolong it. It would make it much more deadlier than it already is. And that would be neither in the interest of our countries nor in the interest of Ukraine. I can't speak for NATO, obviously, but we've heard the same message from its Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg.
Nick Wadhams of Bloomberg.
Thanks very much. Mr. Secretary, first for you on Venezuela, can you just tell us whether the U.S. is considering easing sanctions on Venezuela to get its oil absent of any progress on the negotiations with the opposition? And then second, for both of you on the sanctions and the endgame, you mentioned, Foreign Secretary, that Putin must fail. So is it your strategy now to essentially exert so much pressure on the Russian people, oligarchs around Vladimir Putin, so that Russia will essentially, as Undersecretary Nuland said yesterday, might rise up and, I don't know what, potentially overthrow him? Do you believe now that it's simply impossible for the United States to have a productive or stable relationship with Russia if Vladimir Putin remains in power, either during or once this conflict is over? Thank you.
I'm happy to start. Nick, with regard to Venezuela, we have a set of interests with Venezuela. They include, of course, supporting the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people. They include securing the release of Americans who are unjustly detained there. And happily last night, as you heard, 2 Americans, Gustavo Cardenas and Jorge Fernandez, were released. They had been wrongfully detained. They're now reunited with their families. And it's also true that we have an interest globally in maintaining a steady supply of energy, including through our diplomatic efforts. So all of these things come to bear when it comes to Venezuela, as well as to other countries around the world where we have a multiplicity of interests and use diplomacy to try to advance them. And again, I have to say I'm very pleased that diplomacy brought 2 unjustly detained Americans home just last night. We will never let up anywhere at any time in the efforts to bring Americans who are unjustly detained back home.
We're very clear that our objective is for Putin to fail in Ukraine. This unwarranted act of aggression must not succeed, and there would be terrible consequences if it did succeed for European and global security. And the purpose of the sanctions is to debilitate the Russian economy, to stop Putin being able to fund his war machine from money gained from the oil and gas industry and from the technology that he's been able to make available. So one of the things we've done, as well as putting huge sanctions on banks and on the SWIFT system, is put in export controls so that the technology that was being used to develop the military-industrial complex is simply not going to Russia. It's also worth saying that we've seen huge action from the private sector, whether it's McDonald's or other companies. And one of the issues in Russia is, of course, the lack of free media, the fact that the Russian people aren't being told the truth. But they will be seeing now, by the fact that shops are closing, they're not able to get the goods that they were able to get, exactly the implications that Putin's aggression in Ukraine is having for Russia.
The only way for Putin to reverse course would be for there to be so much pressure. The people around him, the military leaders, the ordinary people in Russia might rise up against him. So do you believe it's possible to have a stable relationship with Russia if Putin remains in power?
Well, let me say a couple of things to this. First, I think it's important to remember that throughout this crisis created by Putin and Russia, we've sought to provide possible off-ramps to President Putin. He's the only one who can decide whether or not to take them. So far, every time there's been an opportunity to do just that, he's pressed the accelerator and continued down this horrific road that he's been pursuing. He has a clear plan right now to brutalize Ukraine, but to what end? Because when it comes to an end game, the big question in the first instance is, what is his end game? We saw the failures of the initial military plan to quickly subjugate the country. That's failed. So he's now turning to a strategy of laying waste to the population centers, to the country. If his goal is to impose some kind of puppet regime by displacing the existing government and putting in place one to his liking, I think it's pretty evident by the response of the Ukrainian people that they will never accept that. And if he tries to enforce such a puppet regime by keeping Russian forces in Ukraine, it will be a long, bloody, drawn-out mess through which Russia will continue to suffer grievously. So our response continues to be to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the Ukrainians have the means to defend themselves, to make sure we do everything we possibly can to exert pressure on Russia and on Putin to change course, to do everything we possibly can, of course, to support those who are suffering as a result of Russia's actions. Ultimately, I'm absolutely convinced that Putin will fail and Russia will suffer a strategic defeat, no matter what short-term tactical gains it may make in Ukraine. As we've said before, you can win a battle, but that doesn't mean you win the war. On the contrary, you can take a city, but you can't take the hearts and minds of its people. And Ukrainians are demonstrating that every single day. So I'm convinced that we will see a strategic defeat of President Putin and the propositions he's put forward. We'll accomplish this by backing Ukrainians in their fight, by remaining united in holding Russia accountable through the devastating sanctions, the diplomatic isolation, and other measures. And we've already seen that Russia's failed in its chief objectives. It's not been able to hold Ukraine. It's not going to be able to hold Ukraine in the long term, again, no matter what the tactical victories it may achieve are. Liz was just saying, economically, the measures that we've taken have erased 30 years of progress integrating Russia into the world. This dramatic exodus of virtually every international company from Russia continues as we speak. And that is having a profound impact, not just today, but over the long term. So I think what we're looking at is whether or not President Putin will decide to try to finally cut the losses that he's inflicted on himself and inflicted on the Russian people. We can't decide that for him. All that we can do is to continue this extraordinary effort to increase the pressure on him, increase our support for Ukraine, and achieve what we all want, which is the independence of Ukraine and a defeat for President Putin, because these methods are a fundamental challenge, not only to Ukraine, but to the very principles of international peace and security that our countries have fought and worked to establish over many decades. That's what is at risk here. We're committed to defending them. We're committed to standing for them until we succeed in making it clear that they will hold and Putin's efforts to undermine them will fail.
Finally, can we have David Charter of The Times, please?
Thank you very much indeed. First question to Secretary Blinken.
Well, that's where we're going to leave the press conference given by Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, and Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State. One telling line from Truss was that since the end of the Cold War, we took our eye off the ball, is how she described it. We will not let our guard down again. Sarah Elliott is alongside me, an American who lives in the UK, political commentator. Can I reflect on a couple of things with you before we move on? I think we missed a story today earlier. Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, announced that the UK would be supplying Starstreak missiles to the Ukrainians. These are missiles that shoot down planes. You could argue, if you're in a Russian jet and you're shot down by a NATO missile, does it matter effectively where it comes from? A MiG that's been laundered by America, or a missile that's been supplied to the Ukrainians by the British? Discuss.
I think if I was Putin, I wouldn't care whether it was laundered or given directly. I would see it as an attack or an act of war. I think that's being exceptionally technical in your definition of an act of war. And
the optics are different, aren't they?
Yeah.
You've not got NATO jets dogfighting.
Yeah, it's not like Top Gun in the skies over Ukraine, but you're still losing jets because of a British missile. So how do you justify not opening up another arena and attacking, something of British territory or NATO, because not only is it a British missile, it's a NATO missile.
Is there a bit of good cop, bad cop going on here? The Americans seem to have, no pun intended, Blinken's blinked slightly, perhaps, and the British are still supplying offensive weapons.
I mean, this is the beauty of the special relationship, right? We're always kind of shifting that. Who's the diplomat here and who's the hardened, armored person? Usually the Americans are the ones who bring in the heavy force, and the Brits make us seem much nicer than maybe we come across. But in this case, it seems the other way around.
We're going to talk about energy in just a second. We've got a guest lined up to do that. You winced when Blinken was talking there about importing gas from Venezuela.
Venezuela, another dictatorship who absolutely oppresses its people. Its people are starving. They've had to eat dogs. They've been protesting in the streets. So what are we doing? We're cutting off one source of income to one dictator and just shifting it to another.
Difficult choices, they might say. Sarah, for now, thanks very much. Well, it's happened. Petrol forecourts displaying a price of fuel today, £2 a litre, £2 a litre. It's one of those moments when the story about rising energy prices comes into sharp focus for many of us. Today, our business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, seemed to leave the door open to a lifting of the ban on shale gas extraction, fracking, to you and me. So how much more could our bills potentially rise by to? Joe Malinowski is the founder of the Energy Shop. Thanks so much for your time today. Should we expect even higher costs for gas and oil?
Yeah, on the oil and gas side, it's a bit more difficult to make a decision about that, because that's incredibly volatile. It's a lot more. It's much easier to make a prediction about what's going to happen to energy bills in the UK, because energy bills are set by what we know is the energy price cap, which is actually a lagging indicator of what is happening in wholesale markets at this point in time and the history. So we are getting a pretty clear picture with where wholesale prices have been and where they are going as to what's likely to happen to energy bills. So the question you made is, are we going to see further increases? I mean, we haven't even seen the latest one. At the present moment in time, we are still on the old energy price cap, which for the average household is
it April, Joe? Is it April was it April when the cap rises?
It rises by 54% on the 1st of April. So from about £106 for the average household per month to £164, an extra £58 a month. And before this has even happened, we are now talking potentially of increases heading towards bills heading towards £3,000 towards the end of the year. From where we are at the moment, around about 1,277. I mean, these are huge numbers.
Huge numbers, and you'd have to say they are going to change consumer behaviour, aren't they?
They have to change consumer behaviour. Back in the good old days, and it's only talking a few months ago, the easiest thing consumers could do if they didn't like the size of their energy bill was to go out on a comparison site like ours and do a comparison and switch and save themselves hundreds of pounds. That market has disappeared. There are no alternative tariffs in the market that make any sense at the current moment in time. And when we are talking, we've got maybe 3 offers at the moment, but they're already at the £4,000 mark. So the only way you can get the bill, which is a function of your usage and your price, and you can do nothing about the price at the moment, is to cut your usage down. It means a drastic change in our behaviour.
Joe Malinowski, appreciate your expertise. Thanks a lot. Well, that puts the tin hat on it, doesn't it? I mean, April, the increases that were coming along anyway, pre-war.
Yeah. Happy Easter, everybody.
Well, at least the weather's getting warmer. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, this could have happened in the autumn.
Yes, it could have happened in the autumn. It could have happened in the winter. I mean, but as he said, it's a lag effect. So it has been happening, but we're just not going to see it until April. But, your friend who's the big green advocate that was on earlier, he must love this because this means people won't be driving their cars or buying SUVs. Everybody will be getting on their cycles and scooters.
He's not a friend. We just invited him on the programme.
Okay.
You're a friend. Invited on the programme.
Good to know.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has apologised, stay with me, to witches. We'll explain why after the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a wet and windy start to the day for much of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and there'll continue to be spells of rain in the west through the rest of the day. But the winds are coming down and the rain will also ease overnight. Weather fronts are pushing in ever so slowly from the west. The squeeze in the isobars ahead of these weather fronts has brought some gales to Western Scotland, Northern Ireland earlier in the day. But through the evening and overnight, the winds ease. The rain also tends to peter out, but it will still be raining with some hill snow for the mountains of Scotland there, and the rain extending into parts of Wales and the southwest through the night. Clear spells ahead of that for central and eastern England, as well as the northwest. And it's in the northwest behind the front where a touch of frost is possible, 2 to 4 Celsius generally, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but a milder start elsewhere because of the cloud, because of those outbreaks of rain. And the rain continues for some time across much of Scotland, northern England during Thursday morning. Brighter skies for a time for Wales and southern and central England, but further showers will come along later on. And it's mild once again, 14 Celsius in the southeast, a bit colder further northwest, 9 or 10 Celsius for Belfast and Glasgow. Into Thursday evening, drier and clearer for a time for Scotland, northern England, but further cloud and outbreaks of rain or showers move up from the south. And so that by the early hours, for most, it's generally cloudy. There'll be on and off rain at times, and the breeze will be picking up. So a mild night, a frost-free night for most, with temperatures dipping to 7 to 9 Celsius generally. Then we start off Friday with that breeze, with further spells of rain pushing into southwest England, reaching Wales, central southern England during the morning. That breaks up into showers, so Friday afternoon generally is a showery picture for much of the UK. A lot of cloud in the sky. The showers ease on Saturday, but further rain on Sunday.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone we learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Here with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. We're going to take a break from matters Ukraine for a moment. And we're going to ask you this question. You might think that witches were consigned to the annals of medieval history, but I think perhaps you might find you were wrong. Scottish First Minister, the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, has issued a posthumous apology to people who were persecuted as witches in Scotland, saying the deep misogyny that motivated this, quote, colossal injustice is something that modern women still have to live with. Ms Sturgeon was responding to a petition demanding a pardon for the more than 4,000 people in Scotland, the majority of whom were women, who were accused, convicted and often executed under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. The First Minister told the Scottish Parliament that she was acknowledging, quote, the egregious historic injustice and extending a formal posthumous apology to all those who were vilified. Let's turn to Kelly J. Keane, founder of Standing for Women, a women's rights organisation. Kelly J., do you feel if you were Scottish, you'd feel better today knowing that witches who were burned at the stake almost 500 years ago have enjoyed a posthumous pardon from Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, I might if Scottish police forces weren't arresting women in their own homes for putting suffragette-coloured ribbons up. I might feel a little bit better. It's a weird one, isn't it? Whilst Scotland really do plough ahead with obliterating women's rights, when you have a man in charge of a rape crisis centre who actually identifies as a woman, who says he will re-educate rape victims into accepting transgender rights, I think Nicola Sturgeon really should look at more pressing and immediate matters. Even in the Scottish census, they defended their position to include gender identity and not biological sex, as I understand it. So she really is ploughing ahead with obliterating women's rights. I don't think helping the memory and legacy of women 500 years ago is going to do much for women in Scotland in 2022.
Just in terms of this idea of the posthumous apology, I mean, this takes us away a little bit from the feminist question, but I just, where's the statute of limitations on this? We've got an American guest in the studio, Sarah Elliott. We'll talk to her about this in a second, but, that American idea of the statute of limitations. How far should we go back with our apologies? Do we ask the French to apologise for the Norman conquest, the Italian government for the Roman invasion? Where does it stop? 500 years does seem a long time ago.
Well, look, if this was an ongoing thing and we really could trace the roots of misogyny back to that defining point and not maybe for the entire existence of humankind, then I think it was an important thing, but it really isn't that. I mean, look, we have women in 2022 are discarded with names akin to which is things like TERF and other names which I won't say in the evening on TV. But this thing, it doesn't come from, misogyny doesn't come from women being found as witches. Women were found as witches because of misogyny, and that misogyny hasn't gone away, and it makes absolutely no difference whether she issues a posthumous apology or not.
I mean, I dare say, Nicola Sturgeon won't talk to us, I imagine, but I imagine her supporters will say, look, she was presented with a petition. She had to make a decision. From this vantage point, it seems like she didn't have to make this posthumous apology. It feels like a political smokescreen. Look at how good a feminist I am and try and ignore the other stuff that you're talking about, Kelly J.
Well, yeah, of course it does. And I think that is where we are in politics right across all of the political spectrum, that people are far more likely to issue some very empty virtue signalling apology in this case and not deal with real current issues that affect everybody, and particularly the women in Scotland. We really do have police forces, both in Scotland, England and Wales, that are arresting women for daring to say that women are adult human females and adult human males are not women.
Sarah Elliott's just going to join this conversation. Sarah.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, it's absolutely absurd to talk about witches when you're changing the term Mother's Day to Birthing People's Day, and from chest feeding or breastfeeding to chest feeding. It's really amazing how in such a short period of time we've fallen back so much in terms of our terminology and respect. And I applaud you for what you do, Kelly J. And there are a lot of women out there who are silent. You don't know who they are, but they are speaking up at home with their children and likewise. And I think this is a trend and a fad that will fade eventually. And we'll look back at this period of history with great disdain.
Kelly J., I know we've said this before, that you are joining us there from the best appointed studio in the Wiltshire area, and that isn't necessarily the best vantage position to look at what's happening in Scotland. But it's something we've discussed many times on GB News and on programmes I've hosted as well. This why there is this apparent mania within SNP politics in particular to be in the vanguard of this movement. I mean, even the sort of J.K. Rowling dimension, she's based there in Edinburgh. So much of this conversation does seem to be focused on Scotland.
Yeah, it's really peculiar, isn't it? I don't know why she has chosen this particular hill to die on, because I really do think it's a rotten, steaming pile of hell. Maybe in 500 years' time, the First Minister of Scotland will be apologising for Nicola Sturgeon turning her back so very swiftly on women and women's rights. We just don't know.
Kelly J. King, good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much, as ever. We've got in the next few minutes Neil Oliver, Scotland's best-known historian. I wonder what he makes of a story about a posthumous apology for... it's just me. Don't need to go back to Kelly J. What Neil Oliver makes of it. Anyway, after the break, the amazing British shipwreck found on the seabed in Antarctica, which is a time capsule from a bygone era. First, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. It's 5:33. Here are the top stories in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has called the bombing of a Ukrainian children's hospital depraved. Ukraine's president says children are trapped under rubble after a Russian airstrike reportedly destroyed the hospital in the city of Mariupol. It's after the Kremlin agreed a ceasefire in the region, along with 4 other Ukrainian cities, to let civilians evacuate. Earlier, Ukraine's foreign minister accused Moscow of holding 400,000 residents hostage by shelling Mariupol, despite efforts to establish a safe evacuation corridor. Well, in the last half an hour, the UK's Foreign Secretary has said that Vladimir Putin is not making the progress he planned in Ukraine. Speaking at a press conference in Washington with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Liz Truss called for a full SWIFT ban and for G7 nations to end its use of Russian oil and gas.
We know that if we don't do enough now, other aggressors around the world will be emboldened. And we know that if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, there would be terrible implications for European and global security. We would be sending a message that sovereign nations can simply be trampled on.
In other news now, a 28-year-old man has died on Ben Nevis in the Highlands. Police Scotland say it's the 6th fatality in Scotland's mountains over the last 2 weeks. Rescuers worked to reach 17 people stranded on the UK's highest mountain. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Brazier will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV Online and on digital radio. Heidi Crowther is a disability rights advocate who yesterday won the right to appeal against the High Court's decision previously to dismiss her legal challenge of the Abortion Act. Ms. Crowther, who has Down syndrome, argues that the act is discriminatory because it allows abortion up to the point of birth for unborn children with disabilities such as Down syndrome. If a baby is not disabled, however, abortion is restricted after 24 weeks. Well, we can turn to Heidi's mother, Liz Crowther, who can join us now. Liz Crowther, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Where's the next legal step in this going to take us? We've got this appeal, the legal process goes on. What's the final destination?
So we go to the Court of Appeal now to appeal on the grounds of the discrimination part of the bill, which, as you said, means abortions are legal up to birth for babies with non-fatal disabilities.
And in terms of how you would like to see the existing law changed, is it so that there would be parity for everybody? So 24 weeks would be the limit for everyone? Would you like to see that 24-week limit, which I know compared to many of our European neighbours is a high limit compared to the typical 12-week limit? What is it you're actually advocating?
So yes, we're advocating for parity across equality for babies in the womb, disabled or not. What we would hope would be that the people with babies with fatal fetal abnormalities, if the parents wanted to, they could still be terminated up to birth, which myself and Heidi don't really like. But the main thing for us is that for non-fatal fetal abnormalities like Down syndrome, cleft palate, clubfoot, things that are babies are aborted for at the moment, that would be different. That would be the same as other babies, all at 24 weeks.
Yeah. And how much support do you think there is out there, Liz, for your position? And I'm sure you just get tired of answering this question because it's an obvious one. But when you look at Heidi and you see the child that you adore and love and has been your companion through her life, and you must know that there are people like her now who just aren't there.
That's right. 90% of women who find out that they're expecting a baby with Down syndrome terminate the pregnancy. A lot of that is to do with the information they're given at the point of diagnosis, and because it seems to be assumed that's what people will do, rather than assuming that they might continue. It's always assumed that they would terminate. So my friends and I, the charities like Don't Screen Us Out and Down Syndrome Research Foundation, are working to make sure that when medics present information to parents either before birth or after birth, that the information they give is up to date and accurate for 2020. So the Abortion Act that we're talking about was made in 1967, before we had the Equality Act or the Disability Act, and therefore the wording is, very old-fashioned. So we have words like seriously handicapped, which isn't something that is used nowadays. So yeah, it definitely needs an overhaul. So hopefully with this appeal, if we win the appeal, which we hope we will, then the government would have to look again at the law.
Liz Crowther, thanks so much for talking to us, and it's a case that we're going to keep following. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on that case. It's not a campaign to ban abortion, it's a campaign to achieve legal parity.
Exactly. And it's also, these are non-lethal disabilities. These are disabilities that won't kill children. They often live normal, happy lives. You see them, you see Heidi, for example, she's a joy and can live amongst all of us just fine. And it's heart-wrenching to me to think that just because you have a cleft palate or a club foot, that you can just end someone's life or chance at life. and that 9 out of 10 women will do that for something like Down syndrome, when they can be very much a part of society, when they can participate and live long, happy lives. You know, I remember when Down syndrome children would only live till 25 because they often are born with heart defects. And now they can live so much longer, and they're always smiling and just wonderful to be around, and to think that someone up until birth can do that. Both of my children were born premature naturally. I can't imagine, you know, someone saying that I could terminate them at that stage. It's quite.
This remains the most emotive issue,
yes.
I think, in the public square, and it's one we're going to tackle as best we can. Sarah Elliott, thanks very much indeed. The story of how Ernest Shackleton got his men to survive in the Antarctic a century ago has inspired many people ever since. His crew were marooned on the ice after their vessel, the Endurance, became trapped by sea ice. 107 years later to the day, the wreck has been found, almost 10,000 feet underwater. A submersible equipped with cameras has found the ship to be in a remarkable condition, preserved by the extreme cold and depth. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now, as you are, by the GB News presenter and historian Neil Oliver to reflect on this. And Neil, we've just seen, and apologies to people listening on the radio, but if you were watching on telly, you've seen these pictures of extraordinary clarity. I mean, this ship looks like it's just landed on the seabed.
It's absolutely heart-stirring, I think, to see those pictures. As you say, there's already reports coming back saying that they can see things like boots and crockery, discarded around the wreck. The nails in the timber work are still shining. The rigging is still there, albeit all in a tangle. It's just it's a time capsule in every possible sense. It obviously makes you think of other images we've seen of wrecks like Titanic. And it's just a deeply moving. It brings out all sorts of philosophical thoughts. Look at the shine on the nails in the woodwork, and it's just all of that time. It's 100 years since Shackleton's death and his funeral and burial in South Georgia, and 100 years later, almost to the day, we see this. We see these images, so profoundly moving. You know, when Endurance departed Millwall Docks on the 1st of August 1914, Germany and Russia had gone to war in the First World War. And then, 100 years and more later, when the topside makes contact with Endurance again, there's land war on the European continent. For Endurance, for the ghost, the spirit of Endurance, it must seem like topside. It's just always war.
And Neil, it's funny you mentioned Shackleton's funeral. I wonder if you've read, I wonder if our listeners and viewers have read a fantastic book about Robert Falcon Scott. I'm trying to remember who wrote it, the polar explorer who wrote it. I mean, their names escape me. But when Scott's death was announced, there were scenes of outpouring of grief in London which paralleled the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. To be a polar explorer was to have this kind of heroic celebrity status. And of course, where Shackleton's concerned, the way he got his men to safety. I mean, they teach it in business schools as to how you keep a team together, don't they?
Yes, he was. I think it's probably worth saying that I think Scott was not a lucky man. Things went against Scott in crucial moments. I think sometimes luck was with Shackleton. There was a moment when they were sailing from Elephant Island to South Georgia, that 800-mile, that epic voyage in open boats, when there was a mini tsunami came at them, probably from the calving of an iceberg somewhere else, and many feet high wall of water came across at them. And it could have overwhelmed them, it could have turned them upside down or whatever, but it just picked them up and carried them safely for some meters, and they were able to continue. But yes, Scott was a gold star, A-list celebrity of the time, and why not lionise people like Shackleton?
It was Ranulph Fiennes, Neil. I've remembered who it was with a bit of help from Google. It was a wonderful book by Ranulph Fiennes about Scott. Yeah. Neil, we've only got a couple of more minutes. I want to ask you about another story today, and I hope I'm not bouncing you into this, but it's this story which I think will interest you. Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister's decision to offer a posthumous pardon or an apology to Scottish witches who, getting on for 500 years ago, were executed or burned at the stake. As an historian, what do you make of that?
Well, I find it bizarre. The timing of it, I suppose, when there's so much going on in the world of the living, to be dedicating time and whatever to events from centuries past seems bizarre. It's also strangely at variance with a lot of things that have been going on with the Scottish government and women's rights and women's identities. I don't know, it feels a little bit of clutching at straws to be offering apologies to women and men, of course, wronged all of those hundreds of years ago. I've said before, and I'll probably hear myself saying it again, that there's so much that needs to be addressed in Scotland: health, life expectancy, education, industry. There's so much that needs to be focused upon in the worlds and the lives of the living, and to take time out at the moment when there's so much stress and anxiety in the East, to offering apologies to people who were mistreated and put to death in that way, I find very, very bizarre. But I find a lot of what the SNP do very, very bizarre.
Neil Oliver, good to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you.
We're going to stay in Scotland via Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine is having many knock-on effects. The price of oil and gas has made big headlines. We've shared some with you today. But the rising cost of food is also now coming more clearly into focus. For instance, the bulk of supplies of potash for fertiliser come from Russia, and it will grow much more expensive. But so will wheat, a third of which is grown in Russia and Ukraine. Is this an opportunity maybe for British farmers to increase the amount of food we grow on our land? In today's Telegraph, the Scottish farmer, Jamie Blackett, points out that many British farmers are holding their breath. Jamie Blackett joins me now from Dumfriesshire. Thanks so much for joining us. I mean, I know many farmers will be worried about the fact that the price of their diesel for their tractors is rocketing, but they're also, and the fertiliser, as I say, is going up in price really sharply. But is there not also an opportunity here to corner more of the wheat market?
Yes, I think there is, Colin. But unfortunately, you have to remember that Britain, my generation of farmers, have gone through an extraordinary period, the last 20, 30 years, when we haven't really been encouraged to do much farming. We've been encouraged. Actually, there was a scheme to pay farmers to get out of farming. The government doesn't really want farmers very much. They would much rather see certainly upland farms covered in trees, and they've done their best really to hamper entrepreneurship in farming. We get tied up in red tape, green tape. We spend increasing hours in our offices dealing with bureaucracy. And yes, I'm sure we would love to grow more wheat, but as you've just pointed out, the really important nutrients that we need for growing wheat, nitrogen, potash, phosphates, are all really very expensive now. Every time you pick up the phone to speak to one of the suppliers, the price has just gone up again. And the diesel also. I was speaking to my potato growing partner earlier. He pointed out that it takes 250 litres of red diesel to grow an acre of potatoes. And the price has risen from 50p to £1.50 a litre. So, the chips are going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, the chips are not down, Jamie. The chips are going up. I mean, you point out in your article today, and I've heard the figure before, but it's in the context of what's happening in Ukraine And food security was interesting, 55%. That's the figure you say, and I'm certainly not here to dispute it, the food that we grow ourselves, our level of self-sufficiency. And I know we've talked about this before, I'll say it again. If the COVID pandemic taught us anything, it's that the next virus might be a digital one, and suddenly we find it difficult to start importing that 45% of the food we need to put in our own bellies.
Yeah, and that's the scary thing, Colin. I think COVID was a wake-up call, really. I was doing quite a lot of research for articles and writing about it at the time, and it struck me that if Ursula von der Leyen and the EU had not kept borders open so that, broccoli and things could have been brought all the way from the greenhouses in the south of Spain through all those different countries and across the channel to feed us, we would have started running out of food quite rapidly. We were very, very close to we did have empty shelves in supermarkets, and we actually did have rationing in all but name, but the government didn't impose rationing. The supermarkets effectively did it for them. We only have 9 supermarkets, I think, that control, most of our food retailing. So they basically took on the job of rationing, and that should have been a wake-up call. And we part of this crisis that we're facing now is because back in the autumn, the 2 plants that produce ammonium nitrate, the nitrogen that we put on our crops, were both incidentally American-owned. On the East Coast, they shut up shop when the gas price started going up, and the government actually didn't really show much concern for farmers. They were more concerned about the food and drink industry. If you remember, there was an outcry because suddenly everybody was worried that they weren't going to have any fizzy drinks because of the carbon dioxide. So they started subsidising those 2 plants to get them back into business. In the meantime, the cost of fertilizer had actually doubled from 300, 350 quid a tonne to £700 a tonne. It's now £900 a tonne after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and the talk is of it going to £1,300 a tonne.
Well, who knows? I mean, the question is right now, isn't it? Who knows where it's going to top out? People really have no idea at the moment. Jamie Blackett, we've got to leave it there, but I was hoping to have a bit of time to ask you about the posthumous pardon afforded to witches in Scotland, of whom I'm sure there were none in Dumfriesshire.
Well, that's an irony there when there's witch hunting going on in Scotland of
you read my script. You read my script. Jamie Blackett, good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. Sarah Elliott alongside me just had a little wince when the Americans seemed to get fingered for the problems of our fertiliser industry. Food matters, right?
Yeah, food matters, and it looks like this crisis is going to raise prices everywhere. And then what happens? We turn to the government to bail us out. But what happens with more government spending? We have more inflation and prices go up. It's a vicious cycle. So something's got to give. And in my opinion, I think our green policies need to be put to the side during this crisis so that we can get more access to energy, keep those prices down, and keep moving.
Sarah, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. If you have time, you can still vote in our poll today. It's about the Scottish witches. There you go. You can read it for yourself. Why are the Romans getting such a bad press? What did they ever do for us? Michelle Dewberry's next.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a wet and windy start to the day for much of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and there'll continue to be spells of rain in the west through the rest of the day. But the winds are coming down and the rain will also ease overnight. Weather fronts are pushing in ever so slowly from the west. The squeeze in the isobars ahead of these weather fronts has brought some gales to Western Scotland, Northern Ireland earlier in the day. But through the evening and overnight, the winds ease. The rain also tends to peter out, but it will still be raining with some hill snow for the mountains of Scotland there. and the rain extending into parts of Wales and the southwest through the night. Clear spells ahead of that for central and eastern England, as well as the northwest, and it's in the northwest behind the front where a touch of frost is possible. 2 to 4 Celsius generally, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but a milder start elsewhere because of the cloud, because of those outbreaks of rain. And the rain continues for some time across much of Scotland, Northern England during Thursday morning. Brighter skies for a time for Wales and southern and central England, but further showers will come along later on. And it's mild once again, 14 Celsius in the southeast, a bit colder further northwest, 9 or 10 Celsius for Belfast and Glasgow.